Hey guys, it's Istebrak. So yes, there is no live stream. I like to host live streams because they're more, they're good for communication. They're good for the back and forth discourse and question asking and anything any detail that I might discuss in the middle of the stream, you guys can respond to it immediately. So I have a personal rule. I don't stream unless there's more than 10 or 15 attending students. If it's less than that, it just feels like it's an empty room. I do thank everyone who did come, the 8 or 7 members that attended. I really appreciate it. It's not me saying that you guys aren't enough. I love you guys very much. I do want it to be a bigger classroom. So if I can host it in a more closed off way, then I will. It'll just mean there's a little bit more time dedicated. I can edit it later. That's just only really the benefit of offline recording, which I don't really like. I don't do offline recordings very much. So let's get started. Let's take a look at what the homework was all about. So I have been on vacation. Mostly it's like a sickcation. It's just for, getting better. So I'm sorry if my voice sounds very weak or if I have to mute to cough, which I will have to do in a second. I'm sorry if I sound a little foggy-brained or, a little bit off. I'm still Istebrak. I will still critique the hell out of your work. But I do apologize if I sound a little weak. I will be reading all the questions that you guys have sent to me on the Discord. Hopefully I'll get to all of them. Hopefully I'll get to all the pieces. It's unlikely that I'll just, thoroughly critique every piece of homework. But as usual, as is the custom, anything that I critique for one piece is applicable to all pieces, and it is very, very encouraged to go back and correct your work, even if your work was not looked at. I will most likely take a look at it some way, but I do encourage that you go back and correct your homework. Okay, so I'm just going to take a quick cough. Okie dokie. It's all this fall weather, really. It's what's causing this illness. I'm not going anywhere. All right, so let's load in all the homework. Actually, what I was going to do is just look at them one by one, so that's going to be a little bit better for staying focused. So the homework for this month, the big deal behind today's homework is that it's all about removing the subject and going back to the object. But at this point on, we are creating a really, really complex form study environment. The assignment for next month is going to be a landscape, a thoroughly rendered landscape. Pushed as far as you can go. So the reason why, again, I'm following up with this is because we did a really focused study on an interior universe of light bouncing and closed off room, but essentially it's all the same. It's a light environment. It's the relationship of the light source bouncing against the walls and the object, and how the object represents all of that. So there's 2 main questions you always ask yourself before starting any piece of homework, and that is, where is the light source? What is this light source? How strong is it? What color is it? What time of day? The question, what time of day, quote unquote, will help answer all those questions, because time of day asks you how high the sun is, how strong the sun is, the color wash of the environment, which is why we're doing an environment for next assignment. It's a nice, quick transition, easy, painless transition into subject from object, which we focused on. The second question that you ask is, what's the color of my object? What is the value? What is the starting value of my object? If your starting value is very dark, then not a lot of opportunity for climbing your values all the way up into the light grays is possible, because it's an already inherently dark object. It's not going to allow much color to exist in there. And because there's no color, there's no light grays. Color exists with light grays. So that question is established. Second question is established. And those are the 2 questions you ask before you do an environment. So we can't speak about object objectively without speaking about the instances and might manifest and subjectively. So the reason why I'll be keeping, going back into the environment question, a question of a specific landscape or, forested scene or distant mountainous horizon, is because this all goes back to how this might manifest as a singular subject that in any kind of concept art you might end up painting. So let's take a look at one of these. I like this one because the light rays were not ignored. I really like it when the light rays are not ignored. And here, there weren't many light rays. There's also an inconsistency between what we're seeing happen in the light boxes here, these windows, and the direction of the light source. So I'll be talking about all of that really, really specific sciences, but I do like it when the light source is a bit inside of foggy room. In cinema and movies, they don't have any scene built without some kind of fog machine in there. Any kind of private scene or scene with light in it. There's always some kind of dust machine or fog machine, or it's not a dust machine. Because seeing the track of the light is so much more saturated in content for a camera or framing or video. It's really nice being able to track down the result. Also, it's hard for you guys to show me how cast shadows fade without using the light rays. So that's something I didn't want to say specifically, because I'd just be answering all the questions by having like a requirement list. You'll just be going through the list. This was an entirely diagnostic piece. So thank you for showing the light rays. They're a little bit exaggerated. They're a little bit over the top. And this is completely not there. Something in between these two would have been a wonderful way to show off your light source. Your light source is the main deal. It is the diva of your drawing. It is the idea behind your drawing. It never was the object. It never was the story. The story is this added like technicality. The story is the technicality. The light source is the meaning behind your painting. The light is the meaning behind your painting. So everything that points back to the light source, everything that re-highlights the light source, everything that creates the light source at the front and center of the attention in development and in the final framed piece is a successful painting, because everything that questions back towards the direction and intensity and time of day of the light source is reflected back in the quality in which you executed the rendering of the object that reflects it, the object that reveals it. You can't just have a white room. You can't appreciate light without a white room. You can't appreciate light without dark and something blocking the object. You can't appreciate the object without enough light shining on it. So don't worry in shifting your attention to light and asking these questions and being so attentive to light is not me saying that you will start drawing your objects less well and start drawing great reflective light rays. That's not what I'm saying. When I say focus all your attention back towards the light source, it is also synonymous as me saying render better, paint better, draw better. It's the same exact, the answer to the question of how do I draw well? How do I make my objects pop out more? How do I have a controlled and managed contrast spectrum? How do I know when to detail? How do I know when to create focus? A lot of it goes back into your frame and the composition and the focal point and the ratios and the Fibonacci and all of that wonderful stuff, but the light is what decides the color, the saturation, the wash. So remember that exercises like these are designed to teach you the importance of asking the light question. I want you to be students of light. It's not just a student of patterns and colors and story and narrative and always worrying about your object. If you're a great writer, that's wonderful. That'll really drive your portfolio home. But if you are imagining these stories and these characters in your mind, when I speak about vividly imagining them, and that'll be the theme behind this month's video time-lapse that you guys will be seeing, that the Grey Witch that I painted, you guys will get those rewards soon, and I'll talk about the importance of visualizing your painting in your mind. So when I'm talking about this painting here, when I'm talking about asking the narrative question, do you imagine and envision the character in your painting? Do you imagine them with the light on them? Do you think about the light source direction? Is that how you're executing your drafting? Have you drafted the light source? So of course we get caught up drafting the character's costume, the gesture, the expression, really bringing the character to life, and all that is wonderful, but they still exist in a world where the sun is the biggest light source nearest to them. And we have to be able to show that off. We have to be able to show how that is happening. So question of the light source direction is great in this piece, but you have multiple windows in each wall. So if you had just the one, that would be very, very easy. And that's why doing the environment next month is going to be, or this month, is going to be easy for you, because it's just the sun you're going to have to worry about. If it's a planet with multiple light sources, like a big moon and a slightly smaller moon, maybe 7 more moons, don't use them as accessories that are not really light sources. Use them, you choose one of them as the light source, casting the shadows, or if it's multiple suns, and that's it. If it's going to be a question of sciences and astrophysics that you're going to be answering, when it comes to multiple light sources and multiple streams of heat on the singular planet, how's that going to affect the ecosystem? So just choose, if you're going to design an environment, this fantasy alien environment that I'll be assigning for this month, with 2 suns, choose one as the light source, the other as the accessory. Okay, so I hope that answers that question. But in this closed off room, the challenge was deciding on a time of day, one sun outside of the room. So what you've done here is you've made every single one of these a light source. So that's the biggest no-no here. Oopsie, what's going on here? So the biggest no-no is that there was supposed to be one sun. The reason why that's important to do that is because you will one day have to draw a painting where there's only one sunlight. And one sun source, and it's going to be inside a room, and there's going to be a slightly open curtain that drafts its pattern or throws its pattern on the ground below. You're not really, unless this person was being invaded by an alien. I've seen this before in cinema. I'm not even trying to make a joke. If someone's being invaded or their house is being surrounded by a big alien light that's about to beam their whole house up, then it would explain why there's lights used everywhere to show this light beam, this threatening light, as taking over the house from the outside in. But that's not the case here. What I wanted was a singular light source from the outside and how that affects each window. So this is great if for some reason there was an alien beaming this whole place up. But there's really not much of a reflection on what this window is doing on this wall and what the other window is doing on the other wall. And just a quick technical fundamental, the windows here are all vanishing points, and the points at which they reach the ground is the point that you measure back towards each corner. So creating a simple line is all you need sometimes. Moving straight out at any angle you feel is what the angle would be if you were to eyeball it of the light traveling through the window. Represent it with a straight line and try to find each coinciding, and make sure they're all parallel. Coinciding corner. So that would be a good way. See, I eyeballed it, but I eyeballed it way wrong. So I would kind of do a thing like that. And there's no machine out there in the world that is pointed at a painting and measures with percentages how well the light is accurate, how accurate the light is. There's no machine like that. So you don't have to worry about all of that. If the light source was consistent throughout and it was one singular sun, if it was a sunset, then maybe we have distortion in the shapes of the light. So it wouldn't be all parallel for each corner. This corner would kind of like umbrella out, the light umbrellas out, because it's more of a closed off singular light from the outside. So if it was a lamp outside of the house, then it would have more of a dispersed umbrella kind of shape, like this whole, I don't know why I call it umbrella, cone shaped light. So if there was a lamp outside the house is right here, then the light inside the house disperses. These are not parallel. These are in parallel, whatever the word is. But because the sun is so far away, and this is the earth, and this is the little house on the earth, the light rays that eventually reach us are so far away from the sun. They do disperse in their own way, but we're too small to notice the dispersion. We're too small to notice the cone shape. So by the time it gets to us, as far as we're concerned, all lights coming from the sun, unless it is a sunset distorted by our atmosphere, are all considered straight, or all considered parallel. So if this was a sunshine from a window, then we would try to make that window light equal in size as it reflects on the ground. So perfect image here. Enlarged or shrunken doesn't matter, but it's almost a perfect square when it reaches the ground. It's essentially what you have to remember. So yes, if the light was respected as one singular light source outside of the room, then it would be the same thing. Parallel, parallel, and you can just eyeball the rest of it. Some of the window is going to be shining through this way. This window is completely closed off. I don't see a lot of the inner framework here of the windows, so I'd love to be able to see those. I'm not sure why some of you ignored that. It looks more like a glowing painting than it does a window. So they just have to ask, how low are you? Is the window higher than you or lower than you? That decides how much of the base of the window frame you're seeing. So this is pretty level with us, and so we can see the bottom and the top of the window frame. This one, we can't see the top so much. I wouldn't draw it there, it would create a tangent, but we do see the base, the side, the kind of the thickness of the wall. Okay, so light source that's universal is always parallel lines, at least almost always. Take it by ear, expect it to be straight, especially if you're analyzing a photograph. Analyzing photograph with lines just like these is a wonderful way to make sure that you are bringing back some of the good patterns and habits of expressing light from universal or artificial man-made light source, universal natural or artificial particular man-made. Okay, so apart from the fact that the light source is off and the windows are all casting light sources and there's not much of a trace of the light of the spotlight on the ground each time, the object itself is very, very under-rendered. So what I wanted to do by introducing a globular object is challenge your radial shading and at the same time create a situation where your problem-solving skill is challenged. So one thing that I've included in my vocabulary that will be in my book as well is art is problem-solving. Art is not just about a situation where your creative energy is exercised and then exhausted and then you're done with art. Art can be a consistent, constant thing you do day in, day out, until your problem-solving part of your brain has had enough. In essence, what I'm saying is that when you draw, and you draw well, and you've learned a lot up until, if you're proficient enough, at least in edges and radial shading, a lot of it is no longer using your creative force. And that's why planning is amazing, because you get to plan all the creativity and get it out of the way. You've decided on the colors, you've decided on the story, the plot, the drive, what it is that will capture your audience and entertain them. But after you're done entertaining them, you now have to make it believable. It has to be a good painting. And so you're going to, because you've pre-decided on what shape is going to be interacting with what shape, this character is going to be in a library grabbing this book while another character is looking out the door, while this character steals this holy book, and one is the lookout and they're about to run away, but you can see some light. Oh my God, I'm getting exciting. It's so excited. And you can see the torch of the guards ready to enter the door. And okay, so you've created some situations for yourself. You created a a situation where you have to solve the problem of light shining through the doorway from a torch light. That's not a man-made light, but it's a pretty small light. It's organic. It's not artificial, so it's going to be warm. And then you've created a architectural blueprint of the library that you're going to be dealing with, so lots of cubes and edges. You have some gestures you have to plan for the character, and the light cast off them. Maybe there's torches one of the character is holding in order to find the book that they're stealing. So look at that. You've created a multiple situations of problem solving with form studies. And I want you to finally have the epiphany, if you haven't had it already, that every situation in your illustration is a microscopic form study. And if you finish each form study and combine it together, your painting will be done. And if you treat everything like a form study and not like an explosive expression of your artistic self and where you think paint should go, you will have a much easier time knowing where to put paint. So each situation that you're going to be painting is exhausting your problem-solving part of your brain. So each of these light sources has created a problem. One of these light sources, which we're going to just name as A, no particular order really, B, C, D. And the light sources, I'm just going to respect the light sources you chose, even though they're wrong. So A is going to be my first light that I react to, but I know that there's going to be two countering light sources. However, this is the biggest window right now, and it is the most distorted one. A light source coming from anything that other than top down I consider distorted, because there's no longer any symmetry on the object, so especially if it's a face. So I have to be able to, I expect a certain level of asymmetry, which can lead to distortion. So that's why I call it distortion. So this A light source, largest window, and causes the most distortion. I will be applying my shadows as I see fit along this window. So cast shadow here, cast shadow off this bulbous shape, leading down. Less cast shadows all around, a little bit of a shadow there. However, as I cast these values, whatever value I chose, and I chose the midtone that you chose here, so it's a pretty good midtone. Your edges are very weak, especially when you have neighboring values all the way around. Your edges can be very, very weak, and they'll throw off the painting completely. So to create a real distinction between the object and the background, all you have are your edges. The ceiling is too dark, by the way. Light reflects back upward. If you've ever looked at your ceiling, when you have a lamp on that doesn't point up, a lamp that points down, you'll notice that the ceiling gets a big bulb of like reflective light wherever that light was pointing down. That's reflected light off the ground. So way too dark. As I cast this cast shadow here, I know this one right here is going to be either one diffusing into invisibility. I'm so sorry for my writing. I'm sure you can write it better. Or creating a rim light. A rim light isn't necessarily an outline of white. A rim light is just looks like an outline because of the way the camera shifted, so that we see only some of the far light that has, if we shifted back, probably taken over an entire side. So we shifted out this way, and then we ended up seeing only the edge. So rim light or completely diffused. Rim light, it branches out. It's part of one other option. So part two is kind of a two-parter. Sometimes it's rim light, or sometimes it's just a softer version of rim light. In that, rim light is just a camera angle, but bounce light, in the total belt of light, you'll see bounced on that far side. So you'll see the object reflecting to A, then B light coming in, and this is all that's left of the shadow of A, which is called the terminator line. So sometimes the camera is all the way out here where B light ends up showing just a little bit as a rim, as kind of an outline. But really, B light, if you change your camera angle, can be an entire belt of light on that far side. So to track down the terminator would end up sitting somewhere out here. Okay. All right, so that's the area of the terminator, so it belongs here. And then the shadow of C will just be the red color code that we have. So the shadow of C doesn't exist because there's a light bouncing here that's bigger than C, which is A. So the shadow of C is I'm just gonna call it the, whatever gray values we have here, so I'm not gonna color code it. And then you've got the shadow from B. So let me just choose a color for that. The shadow from B is all the way down here, diffused on the sides into a fuzz and a lighter value. So it doesn't get to be that dark. However, there is a certain distinct area here where no light can access. There's just no light getting anywhere, and I can just say that is B. Okay, but there is a shadow from B that's being diffused. Diffusion can happen into cast shadows, how diffusion is manifested through cast shadows. A cast shadow can either be fuzzy or light when it is being diffused. Light meaning it's still darker than what's around it, but it's a pretty diffused, open, glowing scene. This whole scene in here should have been glowing. It should have you ever been in a stage or a concert where the concert is the stage is completely lit? The performers look white. They look like glowing creatures. That's essentially what you were missing in this entire piece. A lot of bounce light. And a lot of this kind of bounce light. Diffusing into invisibility. Like the shadows are non-existent anymore. The object is just literally glowing. What I'm doing here in assessing the terminator presence or you know, like deciding which one is going to be countering which, I'm assuming that they're going to be a little bit smaller than what you've decided. I'm pretending they're smaller so that because there's weakness in light source, there's intrigue in object. Object becomes visible. A super strong light source means just a big white room. Nothing is visible, too much white. No light means too much black. So B ends up diffusing the terminator, so the terminator starts to disappear towards the top. It'll stay in its complete darkness, however dark it's going to be. By saying complete darkness, I don't mean black. I mean whatever darkness is capable in that scene towards the base. And then this piece right here is doing its own light, but guess what? We're in a situation where the camera is tilted in such a way we might end up seeing a rim light. Because we're on the cast shadow side. And this one casts a shadow this way. But this, again, is so diffused. This would be really, really fuzzy and really, really light, a cast shadow coming off this. This cast shadow is almost blending in with the cast shadow from A. Cast shadow from B is moving in this way. And then, of course, C, sorry. And cast shadow from B is straight down. Kind of tilted to one side because the object is more towards one side than the other side. So the light is straight, but the object is towards one half of that symmetrical light source coming from the top. Okay, so the object occupies one half of the window, not all of it. So it's problem solving, and with any problem solving, just choose anywhere you want to start, and you'll be able to branch out. We did this in a couple minutes, and excuse me, we did this in a couple minutes just by simple lines and drafting. And this is what I mean by preparing and drafting and getting ready. You have to, you know, decide on what's going to be your dominant window, which window is going to be the largest, the brightest, the most exposed to the light source. That is the one you react to. In fact, you could fully render one window at a time. I think someone did ask that question and I didn't answer it because I want you guys to stumble. I want you guys to be able to make the mistakes. This was a problem-solving question, so I want to assess and diagnose where you all are. A lot of you are still struggling with this first question, where is the direction of the light source? But in assessing it one window at a time and choosing a dominant window, they all can be the same size window. It doesn't mean that one window has to be smaller. If it's a perfectly, you know, architecturally symmetrical scene that you have to draw, an interior scene, be it like a zombie-infested mall with some light source coming in from ceiling windows and some light rays from the sides from shops, or I don't know why I thought of that. Or it could be like a small room with a fireplace, a window, and a lamp. These are all examples of what we've done here today. You choose one that is the dominant one, one that is the most exposed to the main primary light source, be it organic or artificial, and respond to that one. So you could have rendered this entire scene with just A and applied the conditions later from C, B, and D. So the reason why this is possible is because, again, it's the dominant one. It's the one that's going to be doing more work on the object than the others. The others are going to be doing half the work that A has done. So it means that because C is doing half the work as A, I'm sorry if I said B instead of C at one point or another, but if C is doing half the work of A, then we know that C is not capable of completely diffusing A's shadow, but A is capable of diffusing completely C's shadow. So this C shadow right here, oh, there goes my pen. C shadow would be completely diffused in front of the A window. Just grabbing my pencil. I mean my pen, my stylus. So let's take a look at the other pieces and see if anybody did that. But I know you guys are already looking at your pieces and saying, shit, I didn't do any of that. That is not what I did. That is not how I broke down my piece. A lot of you went for the fully drowned scene, where the light is so strong everywhere that you took a very safe position in that all the windows are clustered towards one corner. You're not really making it easy, you know, to not making it easy. You're not making it hard, and that's what you need to do. You need to make it so that you're challenging your problem-solving skills. I like that you had the thickness of the walls. That was a really nice touch and detail. When you guys are detailing architectural stuff, it feels weird to address the width of anything, but that is exactly what will make that object have content. So if you're drawing an interior classroom and you are drawing the frame of the chalkboard, you probably will just apply a frame and that's it, just an outline, a simple frame. And addressing the interior width of the frame before the chalkboard started is just a way to add detail. Imagine that on a door frame, on a door hinge. Addressing the width of something in architectural scenes, so like a fully symmetrical 2-point perspective interior classroom scene, is how you get detail out. The width of the tables, the width of the lip of the table, the width of the chairs, the width of the chair legs. So remember, that's how you get detail, and the perfect edges that you cut with everything. Edges and making sure you're representing the width of objects. The width, if you remember, is the z-axis, is the interior and exterior movement on the Cartesian plane of x and y. So it's x, and then the other one, I forget what it's called mathematically, but I'm just going to call it x. The far side is x anyway. So what we're looking at here is some rim light, which is well done, but I would have loved to see what you did with the cast shadow, because if all the lights are clustered towards one side and this one isn't really doing much, there's not much of a light ray shown, so it's hard to tell where your directions are, but again, it's just a generalized area. You've chosen a very safe, bright scene. All your shadows should typically be moving in this direction. I don't know what the heck that is, but all your shadows should be moving in this direction. All right. Your cast shadows would be a little bit sharper towards here and a lot more fuzzy towards the end. You wouldn't have so much brightness over here because technically this is all cast shadow. You do have some bounce light from the room, but the bounce light does one thing. It does one thing more than it does another thing. Bounce light does less of brightening a scene and more of not allowing values to drop towards a certain degree. So bounce light sometimes goes undetected because it worked very generally as a sweeping brightening of shadows. That's why it's hard to find what is being diffused in what way in a room. And then this bounce light is in two ways, essentially what I'm saying. There's the traceable bounce light, the actual, a little bit of faded gradient that can exist on the side of a globular shape, or the general and sweeping diffusion of shadows being much brighter than they should be if the room did not have all these reflective materials or extra windows. Okay, so sorry about the fuzzy edges, but that's essentially what we would be seeing. And I'm just creating this unison between all these shapes. So we'd see more of that. The edges are all that keep your painting together. That's why edges are so important. Form studies are wonderful for developing your edge discipline. A lot of you are still very, very lenient with your edges, and that's unacceptable. So this rim light here, because the object is so bright, might be a bit brighter. There would be some of that rim light traveling on anything that faces towards the light source if this is some kind of a width ribbing right here. Let's take a look at another one. This one looks great. It's a bit of a dark scene. There isn't much of a light source moving in anywhere. We will have, remember that bounce light I talked about, so we will have this light bouncing anywhere where there might be. So we have this window bouncing up, this window bouncing up, this window bouncing this way. So possibly there might be this big halo of light just existing towards the top. That's all the bounce light combined together. If you want to make it trace back to a specific window each time, you can create little traces of where each light bounced in which direction to add that extra little bit of detail. What you haven't done is applied perspective on these when they fell. So something as simple as that would have done a lot more for your piece because it flattens the ground beneath. Whereas if you didn't do that, it would have looked like the ground was sloped towards us conveniently so that the artist didn't have to deal with perspective. Okay, so we have, excuse me, we have this sloping this way. I don't understand what's happening here. I can't seem to figure out why this, I think I see one of your corners ended early, unless the the window looked like this wall corner and this corner would all be on this side of the wall. Right? But remember, even if this wasn't your best study, you still got it out of the way. You still got all the mileage that comes with problem solving like this. All that mileage is now behind you. You are now that much more experienced. So imagine doing one of these a day. Just, you know, blank minding it, just going in and seeing what you can pull off each day. Doesn't have to be each day, that's the ideal. But, you know, 3 times a week sounds like a really, really great form regimen. And if you did, like if one of your pieces here was specifically off, you should probably aim for 3 of these a week. They can be done in half an hour once you get a good hold over your lasso tool and general Photoshop tools. And it can always be a closed room, couple windows, throw the window in a different area each time, and test yourself. Don't use many references because that's the point of this piece, is that you're not using references. So what we're seeing here is another example of a silhouette where you guys placed your pieces isn't necessarily in the most optimal area to reveal gradual radial shading, I should just call it radial shading across the room. But now that we've diffused from the top, maybe something could be growing towards the top and into kind of a rim light. These areas could be bouncing up against the object just like that. And the object's shadow could be sitting under this glorified butt. So I'm just gonna cast the shadow this way. Cast that shadow this way. That's just the shadow traveling away. And then select inverse. And then the light sitting on the object could just be any kind of bounce light from the nearby areas. And if it's not dark enough, if it's not light enough, you can always darken and leave the leftovers as just some of that bounce light sitting underneath the butt. I'm sorry, I see a butt. This is some sort of Rorschach test. Always assume I'm seeing butts. They're like the funniest thing in the world. So that's what I'm going to see. I don't know how you managed to still have respect for your teacher, though. Oopsie. Alright. So I'm just cleaning up this edge. And I wanted to talk really quickly about how you clean up an edge. Just choose the average value in that area and trust your lasso to do the rest. You see how difficult it was to choose which value, but you can choose anywhere. You can even choose the area closest to. You'll still get a great edge. Of course, it's not the most average value anymore because it was really close. So this would be the average value I choose in that window, in that wall right behind it, the ground right behind. And you get all those rendering points. Look, from a distance, it reads so well when you have a nice sharp edge. So that's all you had to do. You don't have to do this if you have it on a separate layer. Of course, you'll still have the background accessible to you, and you can still clean it up as you go. Okay, for this piece, again, no specific dominant light source. It seems like this window is the dominant one. Why? Because it has the white. Everything else has grays, really, really dark grays. So this is like us looking out into the sky outside. This is where the sun is beaming. If the sun was moving from this direction, the light, either the sun is rising into the window. If you guys have ever seen what a sun does in the morning, when it's rising and you have like a window that's directed towards the east, you'll have like this horizontal perfect image of your window on the far wall facing it. So the light travels this way, or something like this way right when the sun is rising, and it'll eventually do that, and it'll eventually do that, and then eventually do that, and then it'll eventually disappear, and it'll be nighttime. Because then it'll just move away towards that far side, and then sunset light will come in here. So what happens, and this light will be the dominant one towards midday or afternoon. So what happens here is that you've cast a light that if I were to create some vanishing points, they all point to the top window here as the source of this cast shadow. Whereas here, even if the window was moving from this direction, it still wouldn't explain why this corner, and I'm just going to get rid of these annoying lines, why this corner is creating this kind of light source and the top is just as bright. So this is bright, this is bright. Remember those arrows, those perpendicular lines? Well, that's what I'm drawing here. All right, and all of these are bright, bright in the same value, meaning that the light source, if I were to track it down by inverse, is also shining down on these angles in the same parallel line. So that means the light source actually should have been from up here if you wanted to prove that this cast shadow, and two areas being the same, and leave it as it is and not have to change it to accommodate this window. Okay, I'm so sorry my voice is already going. I'm so sorry. This shadow is very diffused, and this shadow is very sharp. Inconsistency. Decide, is it going to be a diffused scene with the light source being sharp overhead light, casting really nice sharp shadows, at least shadows that start off sharp and end off diffused, because this object is much further away from the light source than this object, but still, and this object and this object. So remember, it's a relationship for casting shadows between object and object receiving. Object and object receiving. Object receiving is this object here, and A would be this object here for this guy. So this is so much closer than this distance. So he gets fuzzy shadows, he gets sharp shadows. His receiving surface is much closer to him. But yeah, decide how you're going to be addressing the light source situation. And this is an example of that question not asked, that most important question, that Adam and Eve question I told you guys about in the Discord chat. It is the question of, where is my light source, what time of day is it, and what color is my object? So the time of day would have answered what kind of sharp shadows you'll be needing. Yes, the A distance, the first object's distance here, is much shorter, but it does not mean that this ground is this dark or this shadows are this diffused. It would just be a lesser diffused, not a complete sharp image of a cast shadow. Let's take a look at some of the questions that we have here for the last couple minutes of the class. Hi, Istebrak. I'm wondering, you answered the basics about light for me, but what sort of practice should I do to be able to help me approach this sort of advanced form study more comfortably? Good question. So one thing, like I said, you can render everything with one window. You can do everything with one window, and then as long as that window is the primary dominant light source, all other windows can be done after as an afterthought. So right now, what you could be doing is, instead of completing all of these pieces, all of these windows in one instance of a form study, do form studies with one window at a time. You're still going to be dealing with walls. You'll still be a master pro at rendering interior walls, which freaks out a lot of artists, by the way. Not a lot of artists take on interior spaces. And you'll be prepared for the singular light source you'll be dealing with in the upcoming challenge for the environment. So singular light source. Globular organic object, which can be a mountain covered in trees. A cast shadow that responds to it. What kind of cast shadow do I need? Do I need a diffused shadow? Do I need a sharp shadow? Are there any reflective surfaces nearby, like a waterfront or some kind of river that's moving and meandering into the distant horizon or something like that? Any perspective you might be needing will also be addressed in just the singular window. The multiple windows is what's making this advanced, because it's multiple instances of problem solving. You decided on a core shadow. That core shadow is not going to stay the same. It's going to get diffused by window B. Window B and window C will affect what happens with window C's cast shadow. Window B's shadow is completely drowned out by window A's light source. So you can just, by simplifying it, you can help prepare for a possible complex bounce light from window B once you add window B. But you can just, a much simpler form to make this more comfortable is just having one window at a time. Again, I'm so sorry. My voice is completely going. How could lighting be used to create good-looking composition and tell a narrative? So you find this a lot in professional photography. Usually they like to align cast shadows so that they help point back to the focal point. So if cast shadows and contrast and any kind of highlight or God ray or spotlight all helps reinforce the light, the focal point, that's all good. So if there's a focal point in an environment scene, like the one you're going to be doing, there's a God ray coming out on this castle growing outside the side of a mountain, that's the light source. You've already decided on direction and time of day, and you have a light ray, a God ray sort of, falling on the castle. And then you have the cast shadow of the castle working as a line to guide the eye back towards the castle. So that's one way really to do it. Using ways that the light is, tricks that the light is playing, the cast shadow and the God ray, to point back as like this emanating lines of sight from the focal point. How does colored light affect how an object is shown versus white light? There's no white light really. White light is gray. It grays everything it touches. It's a really strong light. White light kind of diffuses and creates this pastel gray effect on everything. It's all natural light that you should be studying, a form of yellow that brings out the reds and the warms that you see outside, brings out the yellows and the greens of trees, the yellows in the bark, and any soil or sand or something like that. It makes it a more golden version, less of the gray version you see when it's an overcast day, or a blue that you might see. So how does colored light affect? If it's a blue light, then everything is gradient blue. Everything is monochromatic blue. That's how it is done. If it's red, everything gets turned red. If it's yellow, there's no such thing as yellow light that's not neon or some kind of like sci-fi yellow that coming out of a blinking light. Areas by it will get a yellow, but yellow needs to be really bright in order to be yellow and in order to show as yellow. But the light also needs to be a certain dark to show color, or else it's going to be white light. Because yellow is darker than white. So it is going to be a pretty bright color. I would use it more as a rim light. It's kind of not that strong a pigment for a color, so it wouldn't really monochromatically make everything that color. Like a candle is yellow light or warm orange light. You can see the colors of any objects nearby because there's a lot of white to be able to get to yellow. So yellow is a bit tricky, and that's why we study it, because it's just what's coming out of the sun constantly, a yellow-white. It's more white than yellow for what we have. A blue, a red, a green, a purple, a pink would all create monochromatic, whatever it is. But orange and yellow is more natural. It's more of what we see daily. I don't know what it really says in the lesson, but I'm struggling to get a smooth gradients when shading digitally. I think you're shading too much. I think if you really did do radial shading the way I showed you in the previous video from this month, the cylinder video, if you don't have that, please let me know if you need that video or any other videos from this year so I can link them in the Discord. It's a little bit more safer than having them out there floating on Patreon. They don't really have a good security system over there. But yeah, I'll show you that cylinder video. You don't need to be doing a lot of work to get it to build up. It's all about efficiency. Efficiency means less work, less effort to do more work. You're still doing a lot of work with radial shading, and it's still strategic, and it's still good aim that's required. So I don't know what it is that you're having difficulty blending with outside of good radial shading. You're trying to blend back and forth, and your opacity is too dark, and you go adjust it, and you don't have enough, and then it still didn't clean up, and you still have these patches everywhere. If I'm describing what you experienced, it's because you're not really radial shading. Radial shading answers question number 2 of the Adam and Eve questions, which is, what color is your object? Choose a specific bounce light, affected mid-tone that has already addressed the current light environment and the strength of the light source with question number 1, what time of day is it? Once you decide on your mid-tone, that's going to be the permanent identity value of your object, then you can bring in a really low opacity soft brush and build up your globular shapes. If you are having trouble casting gradients on edges, you should not be having gradients on geometric shapes. They have one specific value. They only have gradients if like right by them, right nearby, and they were a little bit reflective, there was like a paper floating by, and some of that paper is bouncing on that side, and then you get a small gradient, or the ground was super white and the object super black and it's a little bit reflective, it'll reflect the ground a little bit better. And as a gradient climbing up the side of the single side of a cube. But yeah, that's like the only instance I see you using a gradient on a cube. And as for blending and having issues with applying color, it's one of the easiest things to do. Just not pressing so hard with your pen and keeping your opacity low, because both of those are already preparing you for not using too much paint. I think essentially what's happening with you is, Chris, is that you're using too much paint too soon. Your opacity is too high. And you don't really do enough organic form studies in blobs. Do some blobs, choose one window. For those who want to redo this, cancel out all other windows and see how you're reacting to one window. It was a wonderful diagnostic piece at the end of the day. Yes, it was a bit too advanced, it was a bit too difficult, but it was a diagnostic piece. In that it showed you, where exactly you're sitting with all your technical skills. How do you know how much contrast to use? I hope today's lesson already answered some of that. You decide that on how much of what is visible. Contrast doesn't always mean black. There's no black in any of these scenes. None of these scenes should have any black, unless they were cavernous windows like the one we saw earlier. So they should all really be glowing. The question generally, when do I use this much contrast, is, or when do I use contrast, period, is a question of focal point, the starting color of the object, whether or not black is an applicable value, the value of the skin tone of the character. There's just so many details. It's just all based off what you've pre-written in the narrative clause that started it all. So what are the objects and what is the point of the whole painting? And around orbiting the focal point should be the darkest darks that you could use. The sharpest edges that you can use, the smallest brush that you can use, and the whitest whites that you can use. Usually blacks and whites come in very, very small amounts. How do we know if light will show rays when coming into a room? That's a texture question or an atmosphere question. It's something we kind of enforce by presence of fog or dust. Usually everyone has some kind of dust in their house. Any floating particles reveal a light ray. Outside, it can be humidity, and just, really, really dark clouds, but a single window of miles and miles of clouds opens up, and that little bit is just all the light that there is. Everything else is all cast shadow. So it's really not light ray, it's more edges of the cast shadow, right? You see the negative space. Does colored light? The question is, when do we know if light rays had I hope I've answered all the questions. What order would you normally recommend for, I'm not sure what you mean by FS. I'm not sure, that's completely escaped me. Form studies? Okay. What order would you normally recommend for form studies, like from beginner to more advanced? I would get my cylinder down and my cube down just automatically. I would just straight up just jump into that without even thinking. Sphere, cylinder, and cube, those are your bread and butter for any object you might ever need to render. A cone is cylindrical based. Rectangular is cube based. A square pyramid is rectangular based. Everything stretches out of those three. Even a cylinder is sphere based. Thank you all for your patronage. I really can't express how much I appreciate your support and how much you guys actually do support me month by month. And I'll see you guys next month. Thank you, everyone. Bye.